serdecznie. To jest nagroda, którą postanowiliśmy przyznawać może dorocznie, może częściej. Specjalna nagroda tygodnika Wprost, redakcyjna dla ludzi wyjątkowych i specjalnych, którzy walczyli o najwyższe wartości. Nazwaliśmy ich strażnikami wartości. Ludzi, którzy często własną odwagą albo tworzą wzorce dla innych, jak postępować w najtrudniejszych sytuacjach i w najtrudniejszych miejscach.
Ta nagroda trafi do gościa, który miał być obecny z nami, ale jesteśmy połączeni transmisją wideo. O godzinę nie udało nam się ustawić połączeń samolotowych, natomiast będzie niewątpliwie obecny w Polsce, choć nie przypuszczałem, że to w ogóle będzie możliwe. Człowiek, który można by rzec ma odwagę, żeby stanąć wbrew wszystkiemu, co robi Putin, co robi, co mówi, podliczyć Putina, majątek. To są niebywałe rzeczy i kiedy spotkaliśmy się z nim 2 tygodnie w jego londyńskim biurze, wydawało się, że nie będzie możliwa jego wizyta w Polsce. Tymczasem, hello Bill, we see you. Tymczasem he promised that he will come to Poland for more than a couple days to have all those meetings. Także będziemy mogli go spotkać na żywo na zaproszenie tygodnika Wprost. Planujemy jego wizytę.
Mr. Browder, we must say that here in Poland, your struggle for freedom and free market in Russia is more than appreciated. I know this is the least typical place to fight for those values. The more we admire what you did, and struggle and consequence for yourself, your colleagues, and now I believe at least part of you is left in Russia. The spirit of free market one day will come back to us.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And a special award we would like to grant for you. This is for a first time award is given by editorial staff by Weekly Wprost. And if you give us few notes, just few words on things you are doing currently after you were forced out of Russia, and in what way you are still linked and devoted to your struggle and fight for freedom of free market and freedom in Russia.
Okay, so thank you very much for this honor. Thank you very much for recognizing the difficult struggle that I and my colleagues, and most importantly, Sergei Magnitsky, my lawyer, went through in fighting the oppressive regime of Russia. My whole story actually begins in Poland when I graduated from business school at Stanford 26 years ago. My very first job, or my objective at the beginning of my first job, was to get involved in Eastern Europe after the Berlin Wall came down. And my very first assignment was to work in Poland. And I worked in a town in the southeastern corner of Poland called Sanok. Some of you may know Sanok. And this was my first taste of what life was like in this part of the world. And it was a big eye-opener for me. At the time in Poland was just after, I guess, the shock therapy of Poland, and as a result, there was there was hyperinflation. The telephones didn't work. It was a very bleak place. And what's interesting for me is that I then moved on to do business in Russia. When I was in Russia, I became eventually the largest foreign investor in the country. I discovered then in Russia that things were much worse than I'd ever seen anything in the early days in Poland. The level of corruption in Russia was off the charts. I decided to fight the corruption by researching and exposing how the Russian corruption worked. And I was exposing it through the media. And In retaliation for that, I was expelled from the country. I was declared a threat to national security. My offices were raided. I hired a young lawyer named Sergei Magnitsky to investigate. Sergei discovered the most obscene and horrible crime had been committed using me as the intermediary. Effectively, when the police seized our documents, they used those documents to steal not our money, but to steal $230 million of taxes that we paid to the Russian government. They stole their own money. We thought that this was a terrible crime against their own country and that they would be interested in this, and we publicized it. And Sergei Magnitsky testified against the officers involved. And instead of going after the culprits, they went after Sergei Magnitsky. They arrested him. They put him in pretrial detention. They tortured him for 358 days. And they ultimately killed him on November 16th, 2009. When I learned about his death, it was the most heartbreaking thing I've ever experienced in my life. And I realized that I couldn't just go on being a businessman. I had to get justice for Sergei Magnitsky. And for the last 5.5 years, I've pursued a campaign for justice. And the campaign has led to, first, the attempt to get justice in Russia, which was unobtainable. The Russian authorities exonerated everybody involved, and they promoted and gave state honors to some of the most complicit. And then they did the most shocking thing, which was they put Sergei Magnitsky himself, the man who they killed, on trial 3 years after he died, in the first ever trial against a dead man in the history of Russia. And it became obvious to me that there was no possibility of getting justice in Russia. So we sought to get justice outside of Russia. And we came up with an idea, which was to impose visa sanctions and asset freezes on the people who killed Sergei Magnitsky and on the people who commit other gross human rights abuses like that. And I took this idea to Washington, and I got Senator John McCain and Senator Benjamin Cardin, a Republican and a Democrat, to sponsor something called the Magnitsky Act, which imposes visa sanctions and asset freezes on the people who did this. And we worked our way through the US Congress, and in December of 2012, the Senate voted on it 92-4 in favor. The US House of Representatives voted 89%. And on December 14th, 2012, the Magnitsky Act was passed, and President Obama signed it into law. And this was the basis for sanctions against human rights abusers in America, and it was the basis for the subsequent sanctions against the Russians who invaded Ukraine. And I believe that I've seen early, I was the canary in the coal mine for what we now see as a much larger problem than just a problem with me, which is a problem in which Putin is terrorizing the whole world. And you sitting in Poland know better than many people in other parts of the world how dangerous this problem can get. And I'm very honored that you have recognized our struggle, and I look forward to coming back to Poland to work with the government and the Parliament of Poland in our quest to get justice, because our next step is to get Magnitsky sanctions passed in Europe. And I think Poland is at the forefront of this struggle. And I'd say one last thing, which is that I came back to Poland about 4 years ago after not being in Poland since 1991. And it was remarkable for me to see what had happened in Poland in those absence, in those intervening years. And Poland has effectively gone from a Soviet country to a European country. And it's a true role model of how a country can be fixed with a proper democratic government and a rule of law and European values. And I'm very happy to be sharing this moment. I'm sorry I couldn't be there in person, but I thank you for your attention and most importantly for your award and your sympathies. Thank you very much.
For us, For us, one more thing, it's very important to remember that free market and struggle for free market is at the end as important as fight for freedom, democracy. This is equal, and Mr. Magnitsky and Mr. Browder proved that if once you break the freedom of free market, then freedom and democracy will go.
Thank you, Bill. We are looking forward to coming to visit you in Poland. Thank you.
Thank you. I look forward to coming.
Bill Browder, proszę Państwa. Autor książki Czerwony Alert. Mogli Państwo przeczytać o nim w jednym z najnowszych numerów tygodnika Wprost. Założyliśmy, że jak wspomniał pan Jastrzębowski, są Państwo częścią elity, więc nie tłumaczyliśmy tej wypowiedzi z języka angielskiego, ale odsyłamy Państwa do strony internetowej tygodnika Wprost i do książki Czerwony Alert. Proszę Państwa, w ten sposób Nagroda Kisiela pokonała kolejną granicę, tym razem państwową.
Na galę rozdania Nagród Kisiela zaprosił PKO Bank Polski. PKO Bank Polski, dzień dobry.